In a small town, a young love was torn apart by a merciless tornado, leaving a boy's heart shattered under a storm's cruel wrath. Ronald, now a millionaire, carries the weight of a lost promise, haunted by Charlotte's fading silhouette. A shocking secret buried for 15 years resurfaces, pulling him back to Ashwood's ruins, where hope flickers in the ashes. Can a vow carved in youth defy time, betrayal, and a rival's schemes? Will their love rebuild what was broken? Share your city in the comments. Where are you watching from? Hit subscribe and ring the bell for more heart-stirring tales. Stay to unravel the truth behind a mother's hidden lie and a reunion that could change everything. Don't miss this emotional journey of loss, love, and redemption. The summer sun hung low over Ashwood, Nebraska, painting the rolling fields in hues of gold and amber. In the heart of the small town, where clapboard houses leaned into one another like old friends, the park was a sanctuary. Its centerpiece was an ancient oak, its gnarled branches stretching like arms toward the heavens, whispering secrets to anyone who lingered long enough. For Ronald Fletcher and Charlotte Jensen, it was more than a tree. It was their haven, their fortress, their universe. At 10 years old, Ronald was a lanky boy with a mop of chestnut hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Charlotte, with her auburn braids swinging like a pendulum, matched his energy, her hazel eyes glinting with a quiet fire. They were inseparable, two halves of a single dream, racing through the park with laughter that echoed across the sleepy town. One sweltering afternoon, beneath the oak's dapple shade, they knelt in the dirt, a pocket knife in Ronald's hand. "We'll make it official," he declared, his voice solemn as he carved an uneven R+C into the bark. Sap oozed, sticky and sweet, binding their pact. "Forever, Charlotte," he said, grinning. "Forever, Ronnie," she echoed, pressing her small hand over the carving, as if sealing a sacred vow. Ashwood was a place where time moved slowly, where the hum of cicadas and the creak of porch swings set the rhythm of life. Ronald's family ran Fletcher's Hardware, the only store of its kind for miles, a modest empire that gave them sway in the town's quiet politics. Charlotte's parents, though, were of humbler stock. Her father, a mechanic with grease-stained hands. Her mother, a seamstress who stitched dreams into every quilt. The Jensens lived in a weathered house on the edge of town, its paint peeling like memories fading in the sun. To Ronald, none of that mattered. Charlotte was his equal, his confidant, the keeper of his wildest hopes. By 16, their childhood games had given way to something deeper, something that quickened their pulses and made their glances linger. The oak, now scarred with years of their secrets, stood witness to their transformation. One evening, as fireflies blinked like tiny lanterns, Ronald sat with Charlotte on a blanket beneath its branches. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle, and a nervous energy crackled between them. "I made you something," he said, fumbling in his pocket. He pulled out a braided leather bracelet, its strands woven with care throughout sleepless nights. "So you'll always know I'm with you," he mumbled, cheeks flushing as he tied it around her wrist. Charlotte's fingers brushed his, sending a jolt through him. "I'll never take it off," she whispered, her voice trembling with a promise that felt bigger than both of them. Their dreams grew bolder under that oak. Ronald sketched blueprints of towering buildings, his ambition to become an architect burning bright. "I'll build cities, Charlotte," he said, his pencil flying across a tattered notebook. "And I'll teach kids to dream as big as we do," she replied, her eyes alight with visions of a classroom filled with eager faces. They spoke of escaping Ashwood, of trading its dusty streets for the glitter of Chicago or New York, where no one could tell them who they ought to be. "We'll go together," Ronald said, his hand finding hers. "Always," she agreed, squeezing back. But shadows loomed over their idyll. Ronald's father, Harold Fletcher, was a man of iron will, and narrow vision. He saw Charlotte as a distraction, her family beneath the Fletchers standing. "You're meant for more than a mechanic's daughter," he told Ronald one night, his voice sharp as he polished a wrench behind the store counter. Ronald's jaw tightened. "She's more than that," he shot back, storming out into the twilight. Harold's disapproval was a storm cloud gathering on the horizon, its rumble faint but growing louder. Charlotte, too, felt the weight of judgment. Her mother, stitching late into the night, warned her gently, "The Fletchers don't mix with folks like us, sweetheart. Be careful with your heart." But Charlotte's heart was already given, tethered to Ronald by 1,000 shared moments. The time they'd raced to the creek and fallen in, laughing until they couldn't breathe. The nights they'd lain on the park grass, naming stars they'd one day chase. She wore the bracelet like a talisman, its leather soft against her skin, a reminder of their vow. As summer waned, the air grew heavy, not just with heat, but with an unspoken tension. Ronald and Charlotte met at the Oak one last time before their final year of high school. The sky was bruised with clouds, a hint of the chaos to come. "No matter what anyone says, we're leaving this place," Ronald said, his voice fierce with conviction. "You and me against the world." Charlotte nodded, her braid catching the fading light. "Against the world," she repeated, sealing their pact with a kiss, their first, tentative and electric, a spark that lit the darkness creeping into their lives. Unbeknownst to them, the heavens were conspiring. Beyond the oak's sheltering branches, the winds were gathering, and a storm unlike any Ashwood had seen was brewing. Their vow, carved in wood and woven in leather, would soon be tested by forces neither could imagine, forces that would scatter their dreams like leaves in a gale. The August evening draped the small town in an uneasy hush, the kind that made dogs whine and old folks rub their aching joints. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of rain and something darker, an electric tension that prickled the skin. Ronald Fletcher, now 17, sat on his porch, sketching a half-finished building in his notebook, his thoughts drifting to Charlotte Jensen. Their kiss beneath the oak tree a week ago lingered like a melody he couldn't shake, a promise of a future beyond the town's suffocating borders. The braided leather bracelet on his wrist, a gift from Charlotte, felt warm against his skin, a tether to her heart. A distant rumble snapped him from his reverie. The sky, bruised purple and churning, swallowed the last traces of daylight. Sirens wailed, sharp and insistent, slicing through the quiet. Ronald's mother, Ellen, burst onto the porch, her face pale. "Ronnie, get inside! It's coming fast!" she shouted, clutching a radio that crackled with warnings of a tornado bearing down on Ashwood. Ronald's stomach lurched. Charlotte lived across town, near the park, in a house too frail to withstand such a beast. "I have to find her," he said, bolting upright, his notebook tumbling to the floor. "Ronald, no!" Ellen grabbed his arm, but he wrenched free, sprinting into the gathering storm. The wind howled, a feral beast clawing at his clothes, as rain stung his face like 1,000 needles. "Charlotte!" he screamed, his voice swallowed by the gale. The streets of Ashwood, usually sleepy, were a chaos of flickering lights and panicked shouts. Trees bent double, their branches snapping like bones. Debris, a mailbox, a bicycle wheel, skittered across the road, hurled by invisible hands. Ronald's sneakers pounded the pavement, his heart hammering with a single thought. He had to reach her. Halfway to her house, the world turned gray, a swirling maelstrom of rain and dust. Lightning cracked, illuminating the park in a ghostly flash. The oak, their sacred tree, groaned under the assault, its branches thrashing. Through the deluge, Ronald glimpsed a figure. Charlotte, her auburn hair plastered to her face, clutching her mother's hand as they stumbled toward a neighbor's shed. "Charlotte!" he roared, lungs burning. Her head turned, eyes wide with fear, But the storm stole her reply, her silhouette blurring into the chaos. He lunged forward, but a gust slammed him against a fence, the breath driven from his chest. "Ronnie, please!" Ellen's voice cut through, closer now. She'd followed him, her hair wild, her hands seizing his shoulders. "She's with her family! You can't help her out here!" Ronald fought, tears mixing with rain, his fists pounding the air. "I can't leave her!" he sobbed. But Ellen's grip was iron. She dragged him back, his sneakers slipping on the sodden ground, toward their home's storm shelter. A rusted hatch behind the house. The wind screamed, a banshee's wail, as shingles tore from roofs and windows, shattered like brittle promises. Inside the shelter, the door clanged shut, muffling the storm's fury to a dull roar. The air was damp, reeking of earth and fear. Ronald sank to the concrete floor, his chest heaving, the bracelet digging into his wrist. His mother knelt beside him, her arms trembling as she held him. "She'll be okay," she whispered, but her voice cracked, betraying her doubt. Ronald shook his head, staring at the bracelet as if it could summon Charlotte's face. "I saw her," he choked out. "She was scared." Above, the world seemed to splinter, a cacophony of crashing timber and shrieking metal. He curled into himself, praying for the storm to spare her, for their vow to hold against this merciless force. Hours later, the roar faded to an eerie silence. Ronald shoved the hatch open, scrambling into a dawn that revealed Ashwood's ruin. The town was a graveyard of splintered homes and twisted cars. The park, once their refuge, was a wasteland, swings mangled, benches upended, the oak reduced to a jagged stump, its carved initials buried in the rubble. Ronald staggered toward Charlotte Street, his boots crunching over glass and debris. Her house was gone, a pile of shattered boards and torn curtains. "Charlotte!" he called, voice raw, clawing through the wreckage. A neighbor, dazed and bloodied, shook his head. "The Jensens." "I don't know where they went," he muttered. Ronald searched until his hands bled, lifting beams and sifting through sodden belongings, but found no trace of her. No bracelet, no auburn hair, no sign of the girl who'd promised forever. His father, Harold, found him there, face grim. "We're leaving, son. There's nothing left here." Ronald spun, furious. "I'm not going. She's out there." Harold's hand clamped his shoulder unyieldingly. "She's gone, Ronnie. You have to let her go." Ronald's knees buckled, a sob tearing free. He clutched the bracelet, its leather now soaked and frayed, as if it held the last piece of her. As the Fletcher's truck rolled out of Ashwood days later, Ronald pressed his forehead to the window, watching the ruined town recede. The shelter's darkness still clung to him, a weight he couldn't shake. Charlotte's face, fleeting in the storm, haunted his every breath. He didn't know then that a letter, written in her trembling hand, lay hidden in his mother's drawer, a fragile thread that might one day lead him back. All he knew was the ache of a vow unbroken, and a town that had stolen the heart he'd sworn to protect. Chicago's skyline glittered like a constellation of steel and glass, its towers clawing at the heavens with a cold, unyielding ambition. For Ronald Fletcher, now a man of 22, the city was both a refuge and a prison. 5 years had passed since the tornado tore through Ashwood, Nebraska, ripping Charlotte Jensen from his life. The memory of her silhouette fading in the storm's gray maelstrom haunted him, a wound that refused to heal. He stood now on the balcony of his sleek apartment, the wind off Lake Michigan tugging at his shirt, his fingers tracing the frayed leather bracelet on his wrist, a relic of a vow he couldn't break. The Fletchers had fled Ashwood's ruins, settling in Chicago's bustle to escape the ghosts of their shattered town. Ronald's father, Harold, saw an opportunity in the move, expanding the family's hardware business into a chain of stores. But Ronald carried the weight of loss like a stone in his chest. He enrolled in architecture school, his sketches of soaring buildings driven by a restless need to create something permanent, something the storms of life couldn't destroy. His talent was undeniable. By 25, he'd graduated with honors, his designs catching the eye of the city's elite. At 32, he was the CEO of Fletcher Designs, a multi-million-dollar firm crafting skyscrapers that redefined Chicago's horizon. His penthouse, with its marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows, was a monument to his success, yet it felt as hollow as the wind whistling through its rooms. Each night, Ronald dreamed of Ashwood. Not the town as it was now, a husk of boarded shops and overgrown fields, but as it had been, vibrant and alive with Charlotte's laughter. In his dreams, she stood beneath their oak tree, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, beckoning him. But as he reached for her, the sky darkened and rain swallowed her whole. He'd wake gasping, his hand clutching the bracelet, its leather worn thin from years of restless fingers. "She's gone," his father had said that day in the rubble. But Ronald refused to believe it. He'd sent letters to every address he could imagine: shelters, hospitals, distant relatives, all returned with addressee unknown, stamped in cruel red ink. His friends, polished men in tailored suits, tried to pull him into their world of galas and fleeting romances. "You're a catch, Ronnie," said Mark, a colleague, clinking glasses at a rooftop bar. "Move on. She'd want you to." Ronald forced a smile, his gaze drifting to the city lights, seeing only Charlotte's hazel eyes. His mother, Ellen, softened by time, was gentler but no less insistent. One evening, she pressed a faded photo into his hand, him and Charlotte at 16, laughing under the oak. "She'd hate to see you like this," Ellen said, her voice thick. Ronald stared at the photo, his thumb brushing Charlotte's smile, and tucked it into his wallet, a talisman beside the bracelet. "I can't let her go," he murmured, and Ellen's eyes glistened with unspoken guilt, a secret she wasn't ready to share. Success came at a cost. Ronald worked grueling hours, his life a blur of blueprints, boardrooms, and late-night whiskey. His skyscrapers, sleek, modern marvels, won awards, but he saw them as tributes to a girl lost to the wind. The Horizon Tower, his proudest creation, was inspired by the oak's reaching branches, its spire piercing the clouds as if searching for her. Yet, standing at its ribbon cutting, surrounded by applause, he felt nothing. The crowd saw a visionary. He saw a boy who'd failed to keep his promise. Rumors swirled in Ashwood's wake. Some said the Jensens had perished, their home flattened by the tornado's wrath. Others whispered of survivors scattered to distant towns. Ronald hired a private investigator once, a grizzled man named Carter, who returned with empty hands. "No record of Charlotte Jensen after the storm," Carter said, sliding a thin folder across the desk. Ronald paid him anyway, the folder unopened, his hope a stubborn ember refusing to die. One sleepless night, Ronald wandered Chicago's streets, the city's pulse a stark contrast to Ashwood's quiet. He passed a park, its lone tree swaying in the breeze, and stopped, heart pounding. For a moment, he imagined Charlotte there, her braid swinging as she laughed. "Forever," he whispered, the word bitter on his tongue. The bracelet, now a part of him, seemed to tighten, a reminder of a vow he'd made at 10, sealed at 16, and broken by forces beyond his control. He didn't know a letter, hidden in his mother's drawer, held the key to Charlotte's survival. All he knew was the ache of a life half-lived, a man building empires for a girl he couldn't find, and a heart that refused to let her fade. The autumn wind carried a bite as Ronald Fletcher's car rumbled down the cracked highway toward a ghost of a town he hadn't seen in 15 years. He was a man sculpted by loss, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights, and a heart tethered to a girl who'd vanished in a storm. Chicago's glittering skyline, where he'd built an empire of glass, and steel. Felt like a cage now, its dazzle mocking the emptiness within. The braided leather bracelet on his wrist, worn thin by time, was a silent rebuke, a vow to Charlotte Jensen he'd failed to keep. Yet something inexplicable, a restless ache, had driven him to return, as if Ashwood's ruins held answers his skyscrapers never could. The town appeared like a faded photograph, its streets lined with boarded shops and sagging porches. The fields, once golden, were choked with weeds, and the air held a stillness that felt like mourning. Ronald parked near the park, his breath catching at the sight of it. A wasteland of rusted swings and splintered benches, the oak tree of his childhood reduced to a weathered stump. He stepped out, the crunch of gravel under his boots, the only sound in the desolate quiet. His fingers brushed the bracelet and, for a moment, he saw Charlotte at 16, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, her laugh echoing through a world that no longer existed. "Ronnie Fletcher? That you?" A voice, frail but warm, broke his reverie. Mrs. Ellis, their old neighbor, stood at the park's edge, her white hair tucked under a scarf, her hands clutching a worn satchel. Her eyes, clouded by age, softened with recognition. "You've grown into a fine man," she said, hobbling closer. Ronald managed a tight smile, his throat thick. "Just passing through," he lied, unwilling to admit the pull of memory that had brought him here. Mrs. Ellis tilted her head, studying him. "You're looking for her, aren't you, Charlotte?" The name hit like a fist. Ronald nodded, unable to speak. Mrs. Ellis sighed, reaching into her satchel. "I've carried this too long," she murmured, pulling out a faded envelope, its edges curled and stained. "She left it with me after the tornado. Begged me to give it to you. Your ma took it, said she'd handle it. Never sat right with me." Ronald's hands trembled as he took the envelope. Charlotte's handwriting, slanted, hurried, etched across it. "For Ronnie." His pulse roared in his ears. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Ellis shook her head. "Ellen swore it was for your good. I should have fought harder." Ronald tore the envelope open, his fingers clumsy with dread and hope. The paper inside was brittle, the ink smudged but legible. "I'm alive, Ronnie. I'm safe, but I can't come to you. I'll wait in Ashwood. Forever. Love, Charlotte." The words blurred as tears stung his eyes. Alive. She'd been alive all this time, waiting, while he'd built towers to her ghost. Rage surged, hot and sharp. Not at Mrs. Ellis, but at his mother, at himself. 15 years, he choked out, crumpling the letter in his fist. Mrs. Ellis touched his arm, her voice gentle. "She was here, Ronnie. For a while, at least. Don't know where she is now, but that girl loved you fierce." He drove to his parents' Chicago home that night, the letter burning a hole in his pocket. The city's lights, once a beacon of his ambition, now seemed garish, a lie as cruel as the one he'd lived. Ellen Fletcher answered the door, her face lighting up until she saw his expression. "Ronnie, what's wrong?" she asked, stepping aside. Ronald stormed into the living room, the letter trembling in his hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, voice raw. Ellen's eyes widened, then fell to the envelope. Her shoulders sagged, guilt etching lines deeper into her face. "You were so young," she whispered. "You had a future, a chance to be more than Ashwood could give." "You lied to me," Ronald shouted, slamming the letter onto the coffee table. "She was alive, waiting, and you let me think she was dead." Ellen flinched, tears spilling. "I saw you breaking, Ronnie. You wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. I thought if you moved on, you'd heal." Ronald laughed, a bitter sound. "Heal? I've been half a man, Ma. Every building I designed, every award I won, it was for her. And you stole her from me." Ellen reached for him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "You don't get to fix this." He left her sobbing, the door slamming behind him. The letter, now smoothed out in his passenger seat, was a lifeline, a fragile thread pulling him back to Ashwood. Charlotte had waited, her promise unbroken despite the years, the storm, the silence. Guilt gnawed at him. He'd abandoned her too, cowed by his fear of facing the town's ruins. But the letter changed everything. She'd survived, and somewhere, perhaps, she still believed in their forever. Ronald gripped the steering wheel, his bracelet catching the dashboard light, its leather a mirror to the one on her wrist. Tomorrow, he'd return to the park, to the stump of their oak, and search for any trace of her. The past had clawed its way back, and he wouldn't let it slip through his fingers again. Ronald Fletcher stood at the edge of the park, his breath misting in the crisp September air. The letter from Charlotte Jensen clutched in his hand, like a talisman. Its words, "I'm alive, Ronnie. I'll wait in Ashwood, forever," had burned through his sleep, a beacon pulling him back to a place he'd fled 15 years ago. The tornado that tore them apart had left more than rubble. It had carved a chasm in his soul, one he'd filled with skyscrapers and sleepless nights in Chicago. Now, at 32, he was here, driven by a hope as desperate as the boy who'd screamed her name into the storm. The park was a shadow of its former self, a patchwork of weeds and rusted metal where laughter once rang. The oak tree, their childhood sanctuary, was a stump, its carved initials lost to time. Ronald's fingers grazed the braided leather bracelet on his wrist, its frayed strands a mirror to the one he'd given Charlotte at 16. The letter, found yesterday in Mrs. Ellis's trembling hands, had shattered the lie his mother had spun, that Charlotte was gone, claimed by the tornado's wrath. She'd waited, her promise unbroken, while he'd built a life on a foundation of grief. Guilt gnawed at him, sharp and relentless, for not returning sooner, for letting fear keep him from this broken place. He wandered deeper into the park, his boots crunching on gravel, eyes scanning for any sign of her. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creak of a single swing swaying in the breeze. A boy, no older than 10, sat there, his sneakers scuffing the dirt, humming a tune that stopped Ronald's heart. It was her lullaby, the one Charlotte used to sing under the stars, soft and haunting. "Where did you learn that song?" Ronald asked, his voice rough. The boy looked up, his brown eyes curious. "Miss Jensen taught it to us," he said, pointing to a small building at the park's edge, its paint peeling but its windows glowing with warmth. "She's my teacher." Ronald's pulse roared. He crossed the park in strides, the letter crinkling in his pocket, hope and dread warring within him. The building, a makeshift school cobbled from salvaged wood, stood defiantly amid the decay. Through a window, he saw her. Charlotte. Her auburn hair, now streaked with faint gray, was tied back in a loose braid. Her hazel eyes, though weary, held the same fire he'd loved. She stood before a chalkboard, guiding a handful of children through a lesson, her voice a melody of patience. Her clothes were threadbare, a faded sweater and patched jeans, her frame thinner than he remembered. Yet she moved with a quiet strength, a woman forged in the crucible of loss. "Tommy, time for class," she called, stepping outside, her gaze on the boy at the swing. Ronald froze, his breath catching. She hadn't seen him. "Charlotte," he whispered, the name a prayer. Her head snapped up, eyes widening as they met his. Time collapsed, the years melting away, leaving only the boy and girl who'd vowed forever. "Ronald!" she gasped, her voice breaking. She took a step, then another, until they collided in a desperate embrace, her arms tight around him, his face buried in her hair. She smelled of chalk and cedar, a scent that pulled him back to stolen summers. "You're here," she sobbed, trembling. "You're alive." "I thought I lost you," Ronald choked out, pulling back to cup her face, tracing the lines etched by time. Her bracelet, identical to his, glinted on her wrist, its leather worn but unbroken. "I waited," she said, touching his bracelet, tears streaming. "I promised." The words unleashed a flood in him. Guilt for his absence, awe at her resilience, love that had survived a decade and a half of silence. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice raw. "I didn't know. My mother, she hid your letter." Charlotte's eyes darkened, but she nodded, as if she'd suspected such a betrayal. She led him inside the school, its walls adorned with children's drawings, a battered piano in the corner. Over tea brewed on a hot plate, she told her story, her voice steady but laced with pain. She'd survived the tornado, huddled in a neighbor's cellar with her mother. But her father hadn't made it, crushed by their collapsing home. Her mother, broken by grief, died a year later. Charlotte stayed in Ashwood, piecing together a life from its fragments, teaching the town's few remaining children. "This place needed me," she said, glancing at the classroom, "and I needed to keep our promise." Ronald's heart ached at her sacrifice. The girl who'd dreamed of teaching in far-off cities had tethered herself to a dying town, waiting for a boy who'd become a stranger. "Come with me to Chicago," he urged, gripping her hand. "You don't have to live like this," Charlotte's eyes flashed, pulling her hand away. "This is my home, Ronald. These kids, this town. They're my family now." Her words cut, revealing a strength he hadn't known, a life she'd built without him. "I can't leave them," she added, softer. "Not even for you." The rejection stung, but Ronald saw the truth in her gaze. She wasn't the girl he'd left behind, but a woman who'd forged her path. He wanted to argue, to sweep her away from this crumbling place, but her resolve stopped him. "I failed you once," he said, voice low. "I won't do it again. I'll stay, help you here." Charlotte shook her head, a sad smile curving her lips. "You don't belong here anymore, Ronnie. You've got a life, a big one. Don't throw it away for me." They sat in silence, the weight of 15 years between them. Outside, Tommy's swing creaked, a reminder of the world she'd chosen. Ronald's mind raced. How could he leave her again, knowing she lived, breathed, waited? Yet her refusal sparked a new determination. He wouldn't drag her away, but he could fight for Ashwood, for her, in a way that honored her choice. As he left the school, promising to return tomorrow, he didn't see the man watching from a pickup truck across the street, Derek Holt, a shadow from their past, his eyes narrowing at the stranger who threatened his plans for the town's land. Ronald's return had set something in motion, a collision of promises old and new, and Ashwood's quiet ruins were about to stir. Yesterday's reunion with Charlotte Jensen had cracked open his heart, flooding it with joy and guilt in equal measure. Her auburn hair, her hazel eyes, the braided bracelet still on her wrist, they were proof of a promise kept against all odds. Yet her refusal to leave Ashwood, her fierce devotion to the town's children, had left him adrift, a man caught between the life he'd built in Chicago and the one he'd lost 15 years ago. Ronald stood outside her makeshift school, watching children spill into the park, their laughter a fragile echo of the Ashwood he'd known. The letter she'd written, hidden by his mother, burned in his memory. "I'll wait in Ashwood, forever." He couldn't walk away again, not when she'd waited so long. Charlotte emerged, carrying a stack of tattered books, her sweater frayed at the cuffs. "You're back," she said, her voice wary but warm. Ronald nodded, his fingers brushing the bracelet on his wrist, a twin to hers. "I meant what I said, Charlotte. I'm staying to help." Her eyes searched his, a flicker of doubt giving way to a reluctant smile. These kids need more than promises, Ronnie. The school's falling apart, leaky roof, no heat. Winter's coming. He stepped closer, resolve hardening. Then we start with the roof, whatever it takes. Their conversation was cut short by the growl of a pickup truck rolling into the park. Derek Holt stepped out, his boots kicking up dust, his broad frame casting a shadow that seemed to darken the air. Ronald's jaw tightened. Derek, a classmate from their youth, had always been a thorn. A boy who'd taunted Ronald's dreams and eyed Charlotte with a hunger that made his skin crawl. Now, a developer, Derek had sunk his claws into Ashwood's carcass, buying up land for pennies after the tornado. "Well, look who's back," Derek drawled, his smirk sharp as a blade. "Chicago's golden boy. Come to save the day." Ronald bristled, but Charlotte spoke first, her voice steady. "What do you want, Derek?" He tipped his hat, mockery in the gesture. "Just checking on my investment. This land's prime for a strip mall, shops, a diner. Progress, Charlotte. You can't keep playing teacher in this shack forever." She squared her shoulders, undaunted. "This school's not for sale. These kids need it." Derek's eyes narrowed, flicking to Ronald. "And you? You think you can waltz in after 15 years and play hero? She doesn't need you." The words stung, echoing Ronald's fears. He stepped forward, voice low and dangerous. "She doesn't need you either, Holt. Leave her alone." Derek laughed, a harsh sound that grated like gravel. "You don't know the half of it, Fletcher. This town's mine. You're just stirring up trouble." He climbed back into his truck, the engine roaring as he peeled away, leaving a cloud of dust and a warning hanging in the air. Charlotte's face was pale, but her jaw was set. "He's been at this for months," she admitted, leading Ronald to the school's sagging porch. "Offers money, then threats. Says the town's dying and I'm holding it back." Ronald's fists clenched. "He's wrong. This place can live again. We'll fix the school, start there." She hesitated, then nodded, a spark of hope in her eyes. They spent the afternoon hauling lumber from a local supplier, Ronald's hands blistering as he hammered nails into the roof, Charlotte passing him tools with a quiet efficiency. Their rhythm felt like a dance, a shadow of the ease they'd shared as children, yet tinged with the weight of years apart. As dusk fell, a sharp crack interrupted their work. A section of the roof caved inward, beams splintering, dust choking the air. Ronald shoved Charlotte out of the way, his shoulder taking the brunt of a falling plank. "You okay?" he gasped, pain shooting through him. She nodded, eyes wide with fear. "That wasn't an accident," she whispered, pointing to a sawed-through beam, its edges too clean for rot. Ronald's blood ran cold. Derek. The sabotage was a message, a line drawn in the sand. That night, over coffee in Charlotte's cramped attic apartment above the town's only store, Ronald's anger simmered. The space was sparse, a cot, a chipped table, walls lined with children's drawings, but it held her essence, resilient and warm. "He won't stop," Charlotte said, her fingers tracing the bracelet on her wrist. "Derek's got the mayor in his pocket. Half the land deeds in his name." Ronald leaned forward, his voice fierce. "Then we fight back. I've got resources, money, contacts. We can save this school, this town." Charlotte's eyes softened, but doubt lingered. "Why, Ronnie? You've got a life in Chicago. Why risk it for this?" He took her hand, the bracelet's leather brushing his skin. "Because I lost you once. I won't lose you again. And this place, it's part of us." Her breath hitched, emotions warring in her gaze. "I stayed for our promise," she said, voice breaking. "But I'm not the girl you loved. I'm different now." Ronald shook his head, his thumb grazing her knuckles. "You're still Charlotte. Stronger, maybe, but still you." She pulled away, standing to pace the small room. "You don't understand. I've fought to keep this town alive. If you stay, you're in this fight too. It's not just Derek, it's everything he represents." Their words hung heavy, a crossroads of past and present. Ronald saw the woman she'd become, fierce, rooted, a beacon for Ashwood's forgotten. He wanted to protect her, to rebuild what they'd lost, but her warning rang true. This was no simple rescue. Derek's sabotage was just the beginning, a shadow of greater threats looming over the town's fragile hope. As Ronald left her apartment, promising to return at dawn, he didn't notice Derek's truck idling down the street, its headlights dark, its driver plotting his next move. The park, the school, the very ground where Ronald and Charlotte had carved their vow, was now a battleground. And the fight for Ashwood and their love was about to ignite. The sabotaged school roof, a vicious act by Derek Holt, had left Charlotte Jensen's makeshift classroom exposed to the elements, a stark reminder of the battle they faced. Yet, standing beside her in the park, watching her rally the children to salvage their books, Ronald saw not defeat, but defiance. Her auburn hair caught the morning light, her hazel eyes fierce with purpose, and the braided bracelet on her wrist, a twin to his, gleamed like a vow renewed. Their reunion, sparked by a letter hidden for 15 years, had rekindled a love he'd thought lost to a tornado's wrath. Now, at 32, he was determined to fight for Ashwood, for Charlotte, for the promise they'd carved into an oak tree as children. Derek's threat hung over them like a storm cloud, his ambition to turn the town into a strip mall, a blade at their throats. Ronald had vowed to stay, to rebuild, but Charlotte's words from her attic apartment echoed, "If you stay, you're in this fight too." He was all in. "We need a plan," he told her, as they surveyed the school's damaged interior, rain dripping through the gaping roof. "I'll fund the repairs. Bring in my team from Chicago." Charlotte's brow furrowed, doubt shadowing her face. "Your team? Ronnie, this isn't a skyscraper. It's our home." He nodded, understanding her fear, that his wealth, his world, might overwhelm the fragile life she'd built. "Then we do it together," he said, his voice steady. "You lead, I follow." She agreed, and they threw themselves into the work. Ronald called in favors, securing materials and skilled laborers from Fletcher Designs. Charlotte organized the townsfolk, parents, shopkeepers, even the children, who showed up with hammers and hope. The school became a hive of activity, its walls ringing with the clatter of nails and the hum of saws. Ronald marveled at Charlotte's command, how she coaxed effort from weary hands with a quiet word or a shared thermos of coffee. They patched the roof, reinforced the foundation, and painted murals of stars and fields, each stroke a declaration that Ashwood would not surrender. But Derek Holt was relentless. Rumors slithered through town, sown by his allies. Ronald's plans would bankrupt the community, his city money a trap to seize their land. At a tense town hall meeting held in the old fire station, Derek stood at the front, his voice oily with charm. "Fletcher's here to play savior, but he'll leave you in debt," he said, gesturing to Ronald. "My mall brings jobs, security. Why cling to a dying school?" the crowd murmured, fear flickering in their eyes. Ronald felt Charlotte tense beside him, her hand brushing his. She rose, her voice cutting through the din. "This school is our heart," she said, holding up a child's drawing of the oak tree. "We promised our kids a future, not a parking lot. Ronald's with us, not against us." Her words swayed the room, but Ronald saw Derek's smirk, a predator biding his time. Days later, trouble struck. A delivery of lumber vanished, replaced by a note pinned to the school door. "Leave, Fletcher, or it gets worse." Ronald's blood boiled, but Charlotte's calm steadied him. "He wants us to quit," she said, crumpling the note. "We won't." They sourced new materials, working late under floodlights, their breath fogging in the cold. One night, as they sat on the school steps, sharing a thermos, Charlotte's exhaustion broke through. "What if we fail?" she whispered, her eyes on the stars. Ronald took her hand, the bracelets touching. "We won't. Not together." Their bond deepened in those grueling weeks, a fragile bridge between past and present. Ronald found himself stealing glances at her, how she laughed with the children, how her braids swung as she hauled paint cans. Yet doubt gnawed at him. Was he fighting for her, or for the boy he'd been, desperate to undo his failure? One evening, as they sorted supplies, he found Charlotte clutching his jacket, the letter from 15 years ago slipping from its pocket. She read it silently, tears welling. "You didn't know," she said, voice thick. "All those years I thought you'd forgotten me." Ronald pulled her close, his heart aching. "Never," he murmured, their foreheads touching. "I'm here now." She kissed him, fierce and fleeting, a spark that lit the darkness of their fears. Derek's next move was bolder. Late one night, Ronald caught a flicker of light near the school, a figure tampering with the generator powering their tools. He chased the intruder, tackling him in the park's shadows. It was one of Derek's men, a hired thug who spat defiance. "Holt says this town's his," the man snarled before fleeing. Ronald reported it to the sheriff, but the man was long gone, and Derek's influence loomed large. Charlotte's face paled when she heard. "He won't stop," she said, her voice low. "He's scared we're winning." Ronald's resolve hardened. "Then we fight harder." He poured his wealth into Ashwood, not just for the school, but for the town. Plans for a library, a community center, a new park where the oak's stump stood. The townsfolk rallied, their skepticism fading as they saw Ronald labor beside them, his hands calloused, his suit traded for flannel. Charlotte's leadership shone, her vision for Ashwood's children a beacon. One afternoon, as they planted a sapling where the old oak had been, she smiled at him, unguarded. "You're different, Ronnie," she said. "Not the boy I loved, but better." He grinned, dirt smudged on his cheek. "You're not so bad yourself." Their progress drew Derek's ire. He confronted them at the school, his truck blocking the road, his voice dripping venom. "You're fools, both of you," he said, eyes locked on Charlotte. "This town's dead. Give up or I'll make you." Ronald stepped between them, his voice cold. "Try it, Holt. We're not running." Derek's gaze lingered, a promise of retribution, before he drove off. That night, Ronald stayed at the school, guarding the generator, his mind racing. Derek's threats were escalating, and the town's fragile hope hung by a thread. But Charlotte's kiss, her faith in their fight, anchored him. As dawn broke, painting the sapling gold, Ronald knew they'd face whatever came together. Unseen, a matchbox lay discarded in the park, a spark waiting to ignite Derek's next move, and Ashwood's future teetered on the edge of flame. Ronald Fletcher stood in the reborn park, his eyes fixed on the young oak tree, its sapling leaves trembling with life where a storm had claimed its predecessor 15 years ago. The town, once a husk of splintered dreams, thrummed with purpose. New homes gleamed, a library's doors swung wide, and the school Charlotte Jensen had fought for stood proud, its walls vibrant with children's murals. Their battle against Derek Holt's greed had forged a fragile victory, but the scars of his sabotage, the sawed beams, the stolen lumber, the threats, lingered like ghosts. Ronald's braided leather bracelet, a twin to Charlotte's, caught the sunlight, a symbol of a vow that had weathered a tornado, a decade of silence, and a rival's wrath. A year had passed since Ronald moved Fletcher Designs to Ashwood, pouring his wealth and heart into reviving the town. The fight had been grueling, not just against Derek's schemes, but against the doubt that gnawed at both him and Charlotte. Her kiss, fierce and fleeting under the school's floodlights, had sealed their partnership. But trust had grown slowly, tendrils curling through shared labor and quiet moments. Now, as children raced across the park, their laughter a melody of hope, Ronald felt a certainty he'd never known in Chicago's cold towers. He was home, not just in Ashwood, but with Charlotte, the girl who'd waited when he'd lost his way. The school's grand opening was set for today, a celebration of Ashwood's resilience. Charlotte stood on a makeshift stage, her auburn hair loose, her hazel eyes bright as she addressed the crowd. Townsfolk, teachers, even reporters from Lincoln. "This isn't just a building," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It's a promise to our children, to our future." She played a lullaby on a restored piano, the notes floating like memories of their youth, stirring tears in the crowd. Ronald watched, his chest tight with pride, seeing the woman she'd become, fierce, compassionate, the heart of Ashwood. Her bracelet glinted, a quiet echo of their forever. As applause faded, a shadow crossed the park. Derek Holt, uninvited but undeterred, leaned against a tree, his smirk ablaze in the festive air. Ronald's fists clenched, memories of Derek's threats, "This town's mine," stinging anew. Charlotte caught his gaze, shaking her head slightly, a silent plea to let the day belong to joy. But Derek approached, his voice low and venomous. "Nice show, Fletcher. But you can't buy a town's soul." Ronald stepped forward, voice steady. "We didn't buy it, we earned it. Walk away, Holt." Derek's eyes flicked to Charlotte, a flicker of old jealousy. Then he retreated, his parting glance a promise of trouble yet to come. The celebration continued, but Ronald's unease lingered. He found Charlotte later, helping children hang paper lanterns in the park. "He won't give up," she said, her voice low. "Derek's lost ground, but he's dangerous when cornered." Ronald took her hand, the bracelets touching. "We've faced worse. He can't break us," she smiled, but worry lingered in her eyes. They worked side by side, stringing lights that twinkled like stars, and Ronald felt a surge of resolve. He'd build more than a town. He'd build a life with her. That evening, under the sapling oak, Ronald led Charlotte to a quiet corner of the park, where fireflies began their dance. He'd planned this moment for weeks, his heart racing as he knelt, a ring in his hand, its band etched with a braid like their bracelets. "Charlotte," he said, voice thick, "I lost you once and it nearly broke me. I don't want another day without you. Forever." Her breath caught, tears shimmering as she nodded. "Forever," she whispered, slipping the ring on. They kissed, slow and deep, the world fading until it was just them, the oak, and a promise kept. Their wedding came swiftly, a simple ceremony in the park, the sapling oak, their altar. Townsfolk gathered, their cheers a chorus of shared triumph. Charlotte wore a cream dress, her braid woven with wildflowers, her bracelet a quiet vow beside the ring. Ronald, in a plain suit, felt richer than any Chicago penthouse could make him. They danced under strung lights, her lullaby hummed by children, a melody that bound the past to the present. As they swayed, Charlotte rested her head on his chest, her voice soft. "I never stopped loving you, Ronnie. Even when I thought you'd forgotten." He tightened his hold, guilt and gratitude warring. "I'll spend my life proving I never will." Months later, Ashwood flourished. New shops opened, families returned, and the park was alive with laughter. Ronald built Charlotte a house by the oak, its windows framing the school, a piano room echoing with her music. One quiet evening, as they sat on their porch, Charlotte placed his hand on her belly, a shy smile curving her lips. "Hope," she said, naming their unborn daughter, a word that held all they'd fought for. Ronald's eyes stung, the weight of their journey, tornado, silence, sabotage, melting into joy. "Hope," he echoed, kissing her, their bracelets brushing a circle unbroken. Derek's shadow faded, his plans thwarted by a town united, though whispers of his retreat to another county lingered. Ashwood's scars remained, but they were badges of survival, like the sapling oak that grew stronger each day. Ronald walked the park one dawn, Charlotte at his side, her hand in his. The school's bell rang, calling children to her classroom, and the town pulsed with life. Their vow, born under an oak and tested by storms, had become more than a promise. It was a legacy, a future named Hope, a love that no force could tear asunder. What did Ronald and Charlotte's journey stir in your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments. Did their unbreakable vow move you? Thank you for joining us in Ashwood's tale of love and redemption. Your support lights our way. Subscribe and hit the bell to catch more stories that tug at the soul. Until we meet again, keep holding tight to your own promises. See you soon.